So, common frequency types. If you have a look at the RF spectrum, which you can get from a Google if you're that way inclined, will show you the range from ultra low frequency all the way up to microwaves and eventually light. The main frequencies used for communication, however, are HF, VHF, UHF, and recently SHF. They stand for high frequency, very high frequency, ultra high frequency, and super high frequency, respectively. And they all have different pros and cons. For most people, day to day, you'll not really use HF. I think it would be very rare for you to come across something that uses HF for communication. If anyone knows of any that they come across regularly, let me know. But I know that this one is usually used in amateur radio. Would use this quite a lot, as well as military and possibly police and other areas. They would use HF for communications. But more commonly, you get VHF and UHF, and these would be the ones that would use like of your standard walkie-talkies that you could buy that are quite short range. Also your mobile devices, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, all of them operate within the VHF to UHF range. With the exception, I only added this in recently, the SHF, because some Wi-Fi hubs now have 5 gigahertz band that they use, and they tried to use this to combat the cluttering of the 2.4 gigahertz area, which is in UHF, which is what most wireless devices use. It's sort of known as the junk band, because everything from wireless doorbells, Wi-Fi, any cheap wireless product you get generally uses 2.4 gigahertz, as well as some drones. Drones as well, also some of them have now started switching to the 5 gigahertz. I think some of them also use that for video feeds, for the streaming of the video from the drone to your handheld device. They use 5 gigahertz for that as well. So that's becoming more and more common for the super high frequency. The pros and cons of each, generally, apart from HF, I'll cover HF in another topic, because it'd be more towards amateur radio enthusiasts. But if you're interested in HF, I'll go over it in a separate video, because there's a lot to it with propagation and loads of fun stuff. But I'll cover propagation in another video as well. VHF and UHF, generally they are line of sight. So if you can see it and you're using VHF to UHF, you can talk to it, as a general rule of thumb. Now, what confuses a lot of people, and myself included whenever I first started doing this, is that the sky is not a barrier to VHF and UHF, and also SHF. What I mean by that is satellite communication. So your GPS that you would use uses UHF, I believe. Yes, UHF, had to check that. And it talks to a satellite which is thousands of miles away, but there's nothing in between them. There's nothing that's going to get in the way. Now, there's atmospheric things that can affect signals, but generally speaking, it's not going to outright block it, which means that you can get very high range for very low power. And that's the other benefit of these. The higher in frequency you go, the lower the power requirement. Now, there's a caveat to that, and amateur radio buffs around the world are probably screaming at me, but to keep things simple, that's the rule of thumb. You can pump more power through these, but you don't have to, which is why they're very popular, especially UHF in mobile devices, because they don't require massive batteries to power them. The other good thing with them is the antenna length. So as you go up in frequency, the antenna that you need is shorter. So something to be aware of with radios is that you need to have an antenna that is the correct size for the frequency that you're using. Now, you can get antennas that you'll buy that'll dual band and tri-band and stuff like that, which will work on lots of different frequencies, but they're made in a very specific way to be allowed to do that. As a general rule of thumb, you need to make the antenna to fit the frequency that you want. and I'm going to build an antenna in an upcoming video just to show how that's done and how you work that out. So as the frequency increases, the size of the antenna that you need decreases. Again, that's why it's popular with handheld and small devices. It lets you get quite a lot of communication in quite a small package. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, how, with my mobile device, with my phone, how do I talk all the way around the world? And the simple answer is repeaters. Now, for mobile phones, they work slightly differently than they would for, say, an amateur radio repeater, but the principle is basically the same. Throughout your town, city, area, generally speaking, on top of a mountain, you'll find a repeater, a mobile phone repeater. So for anyone who is interested, the frequencies have a set range that they operate within. For HF, it's 3 to 30 megahertz. VHF, 30 to 300 megahertz. UHF is 300 megahertz to 3 gigahertz. And super high frequency is 3 gigahertz to 30 gigahertz.